everybody, I'm Ebony. This is Ebonee's Creativity. Thank you so much for joining me here on my channel. Today's video is going to be extremely beginner friendly. I'm going to be taking it back to the basics. I'm not going to be using any power tools, nothing too fancy, no sander, no sprayer, none of that stuff that I normally use. We're going to only spend a little bit of time and a little bit of money, and I'm going to show you how you could turn a piece of trash into something that you can profit from. If you find this video enjoyable at any point, please do not forget to subscribe to my channel or leave me a comment or thumbs up the video. Thank you so much for watching. Also, since you may be a beginner, and I know being a beginner could be a little bit vulnerable and make you feel kind of unsure, I am also going to be doing something that I am going to be vulnerable with because I have never done a transfer before. And one of you all, my subscribers, have requested that I try a transfer. So I am going to be doing that in this video. So you're a beginner at flipping. I'm a beginner at using transfers. Let's just try it out and see what we come up with. Thank you so much for watching. Let's get to it. Here is today's piece. I got this from a yard sale for just $15, and I thought it would be a great piece to flip because for beginners, it's very important that you pick something with easy materials to work with. Real wood is the easiest material, I think, to flip. This one is in pretty decent condition as it has no major scratches or gouges, and the drawer fronts are pretty much flat. There's a little bit of detail around the edges, but for the most part, they don't have too much detail, which is what we want. The more details a piece has, the harder hand sanding becomes, and since this is a beginner tutorial, we want to make things as easy as possible for ourselves. So there are a few scratches here along the edge of this, and I am just going to flatten those using 220 grit sandpaper wrapped around a sanding sponge. You can get sandpaper and a sanding sponge at the Dollar Tree. I found that when I'm using really cheap sandpaper, I have to use more than one sheet. So I do like to pay a little bit more, slightly more at a store like Harbor Freight and get a little bit more durable sandpaper. So this sanding disc that I have came from Harbor Freight, but the sanding block is from Dollar Tree. What our goal here is to flatten out any gouges or scratches that we may have on the surface of our piece and to get a uniform level. So once my scratches are gone and I can rub my hand over it and not feel the scratch any longer, I know I've sanded enough. That is how I determine how much that I need to sand. As long as it feels smooth to my hand when I rub across it, then I feel that I've sanded enough. Next, I'm doing a scuff sanding, which is where I scuff the whole piece, hoping to remove any surface dirt or any traces of a previous top coat that will prevent my future paint from sticking. So you will see me using moderate pressure and just sanding over the whole entire piece in order to make a gritty surface for my paint to stick to. At this point, I've scuff sanded the whole body, and so now I'm ready to do the front of the drawers. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the hardware from those and just continue to scuff sand. When I'm working with pieces with molding or trim like these drawer fronts have, I do those pieces first and then I do my long flat areas second. I don't think I'll reuse this hardware, but I always keep them just in case I need any screws or hardware in the future. I have them on hand. As I said before, now that I'm done scuff sanding, my piece looks ashy all over, and that's kind of what I was looking for. This piece didn't really have any places for me to fix except around the edges, which is where you can see I went a little bit deeper and now the finish is gone. But otherwise, my main goal was just to rough this surface up and to remove the outermost layer of the manufacturer's finish. Up next, I'm going to be giving this thing a bath with some simple green, just washing everything down as well as I can with a microfiber cloth. That way it doesn't leave a bunch of lint behind to cause problems for me when I start to paint. As I'm cleaning this, I am looking for indicators of whether this piece is a bleeder or not. When I say a bleeder, that just means that if it has red or orange undertones that are coming out, they will bleed through your paint and they will need to be sealed in before you can paint over them. This case, my water and my rag look brown and not red or orange, so I do not think this piece would be a bleeder, and I think I am safe to not prime this piece. The main primer that I use has gotten very expensive, so for extra insurance, instead of priming, I'm going to buff in this liquid sandpaper over the entire piece using a different microfiber cloth. If you use this, you may notice an ashy looking film that starts to develop, which is perfectly normal. Next, I'm going in with wave release chalk paint, which you can find at Walmart, and I'm going to be showing you my painting technique. If there are any little cracks or crevices or trim which create recessed areas on the front of my drawers, I will go into those first just so that I can make sure that I don't miss them. I like to do my paint from the outside in toward the center. So I make sure I load the crevices up with paint, and then I kind of go on the outside, and then I work my way in toward the center. I like to keep my strokes as long as possible, and I like to keep them in the direction of the wood grain. So you can see on the long flat parts, I'm doing those horizontally, and on the side pieces, I'm doing those vertically. And I'm trying not to cover the same area too many times because that is what creates brush strokes. Generally, I'll touch any given area twice, once to just get some paint on there, and then I'll come back after I've gotten paint on the whole surface, and then I'll go over it with a couple of smoothing strokes, long solid strokes as quickly as possible, and I'll make sure that my tip of my brush remains wet the whole time I'm painting, whether it be I need to add more paint or I need to spritz it with a little bit of water in my water mister. Then I'll do whichever I feel that it requires. But I don't like to go over the same area too many times, and I don't treat any paint like it has one coat coverage. I always use at least 2 coats of any paint that I use, even chalk paint, which is thick enough to do 1 coat probably. I don't treat it like that. I want to do my coats as thin as possible, and I also want to make sure that I get the least amount of brush strokes and texture as possible. Sometimes I do the edges first, sometimes I do those last. In this instance, I'm doing those last. Here's how this drawer looks after 1 coat. So you can see there's some areas along the side that are not finished, but that's okay. I will come back in and get those on my 2nd coat. I'd rather do 2 light coats than 1 thick chunky coat that doesn't look good. So this is not something that you want to rush through. I normally spend the most time on my painting. On areas that are just kind of flat, all one surface, this is how I do them. I just go in the longest, straightest stroke I can across. I load my brush up. Again, I'm just trying to get paint on here, make sure that the tip of my brush stays wet, and make sure that my strokes are as long and straight as I can possibly get them. Once you start to feel it tugging, you'll know that you need to either add more paint or mist it with your water if you already have paint on your brush. So although the long flat surfaces don't have any ridges or any trim to look out for, my paint method is still basically stays the same. I want to use a generous amount of product on the first pass just to get some paint on here, keeping my strokes all in one direction. And then on my second pass, I want to use much less product, mostly water and thinner coats of paint, and just to get smoothing strokes. That way my brush strokes are not present. Another thing I want to point out when it comes to painting is how I have my piece elevated onto my sawhorses. If you don't have sawhorses, you can use 4 of the same buckets. You can use whatever you have that will elevate your piece. Some people even like to paint their pieces upside down to make sure they don't miss any areas. But I find that it's easier to do this at eye level than it is to bend down and do it. I miss a lot more when I'm exerting my energy to bend down to paint. So now that I am on this side piece, I want to point out that I am doing the same kind of method that I did on the drawer fronts. I'm painting the part that has a little edge or ledge to it, and then I'm going in and putting my strokes in the same direction to fill in the middle portion. So here's how everything looked after one coat. You will notice a lot of imperfections and areas that you can see through, but that is okay because like I said before, in my opinion, there is not one full coat coverage from any paint. I did the same exact steps off camera, and here is how they look after 2 coats. So a lot less product was used on the second coat, but everything else is pretty much the same. And you can see they look very opaque and beautiful now. Here's how it looked with everything put back together. And here is the transfer that we're going to be using. It did come from Amazon. This transfer did come in 3 pieces, so I just attached a little piece of painter's tape onto the edge of each one so that I can try to get my placement right. And I just kind of kept moving it around. I would move back and look at it, kind of trying to eyeball how it would come out. And I just kept on playing with it until I got a position I thought I would like. The good thing about these transfers by Prima is that they come with lines on all the pieces, so it makes it much easier to just line everything up and make sure that everything is straight. I do think the placement process would have been a lot easier if I had picked a piece with no trim around the edges. So I was having trouble kind of seeing where I had it. So I decided to cut some of the excess backing paper off, and then I was just ready to go ahead and give it a go. I started out by lifting up one piece of my tape and slowly removing a portion of the backing, and then I just pushed down on the transfer and set it into place by just rubbing across it with my hand. Once that was stuck, I removed the other side of my tape and removed the rest of the backing paper. You want to do this slowly just in case any of your transfer starts to come off on the backing paper. You can catch it and kind of stick it back down into place. There is this little wooden stick that comes in the kit with the transfer, so I am just using that to make sure that I touch every portion of this transfer and so that it is going to be stuck down to this drawer front. I'm finding that the areas that had the hardest time sticking were these areas that are kind of around the trim pieces that needed to fold around the trim a little bit. So I made sure to spend a lot of time trying to push those areas of the transfer into the drawer front. I tried to place my transfer so that as much of it showed as possible, but I did have a little piece on the bottom that I had to kind of tuck under, so I wanted to leave this clip in to show you that. And now I am ready to start trying to remove this. As I'm lifting it up, I can see that it's not all the way stuck down, so I am just kind of doing a motion where I'm pulling it back with one hand and flatten it out. Anything that's not secured to the dresser, I'm flattening it out with the stick and then I'm pulling it up simultaneously. I've seen these applied a couple different ways, but I'm a Scorpio and I'm hard-headed and I like to do things in my own way. So I am just doing this method and it worked out pretty well. It was not as fast as I thought it would be. I kind of thought it would be like the little temporary tattoos that you put water on when you were a kid and kind of just peel the backing off and you can do it all in one fell swoop. But this was not like that. Especially around the trim areas, I had to pay special attention. If you rip this off, you don't really get another chance to line it back up perfectly. So I wanted to take it slow. But it's not a hard process. It's just you want to make sure that you're doing a thorough job. So you want to take this slow. These transfers are very fragile and they rip very easily. Some of you may wonder why I'm showing something so tedious in a beginner-friendly video. The reason is the cost. As a beginner, you wouldn't want to necessarily sink a lot of money into pieces until you really figure out what you're doing. One container of Fusion costs about 30 bucks, which is the paint that I normally use. I've spent $15 for this transfer and $7 for this paint. So I'm giving this much more of an impact than just 2 coats of plain paint would give it, and I've saved some money while doing so. So that is why I chose to take this route. If you are a beginner that is cost conscious, I would say a transfer is definitely something to look into if you want to give your piece that wow factor while saving a little bit of money. I left this clip in to show you that I made an error with my placement, and if I had stuck this down as I have it on there now, all of the words on the third drawer would have been in between the 2 dressers in the crack. So if you try this and you end up in that same situation, you could either stop and cut it out or just carefully pull outward on the transfer paper so that it doesn't touch anything and then move it down. Even after I went over this with the stick and my finger and my hand, I still had some areas that were in the trim crevices that did not stick, so I just pushed those in like so. And then I gave everything a final sanding with a 400 grit sandpaper just to make sure that my paint was smooth, and then I wiped back all the sanding dust that created. When I was a beginner, I had a lot of trouble with top coats, but now I just use wipe-on top coats and they work just fine for me. This one is from Fusion, and I'm just putting it on a dampened Dollar Tree sponge, and then I'm just going to wipe this on. This is the only kind of higher end product that you see in this video, and I recommend it for beginners as your splurge item because a lot of people have problems with top coats. So either top coats that are wipe on or waxes, I think, are a better place to start for beginners than trying to go straight into polys and other toppers that leave streaks and pull tannins through and such. So just get a wipe-on poly and these Dollar Tree sponges from the car section in Dollar Tree and just make it easier for yourself. I apply this product much like I apply my paint. On this top flat portion, I am doing long straight strokes all the way across, trying not to stop in the middle because sometimes that will show. Also, when you use this product, you want to make sure that you roll it to mix it together. Definitely don't shake it because you will see those bubbles on your piece. Because I have this transfer on here, I started in the center of this drawer. If I did not have this transfer on here, I would have started on the edges, but I wanted to make sure that I really seal this transfer in, so I'm going over it several times with several different coats of poly, and then I'll be doing the outside edges of the drawers. This sponge does hold a lot of product, so you will also create bubbles if you try to put too much product on here and then push it into your piece. So beware of that. If you start to find that you have a lot of bubbles in your sponge or in your top coat as you're rubbing it on, rinse it completely out with water and then just apply less topper. But on the side panels, you will see I'm doing these much like I did my paint. I'm going around the edges first, and then I'm just going to fill in that middle part with long straight strokes. If you notice any areas that you miss, I would say just wait until your second pass to cover those areas, because once you start trying to skip over areas and just fill in certain areas, it just starts to look patchy and it won't look good. After 2 coats of poly, I went in with these IKEA gribble handles and attached those. And without further ado, here is the finished look of this piece. Thank you so much for watching. Leave me a comment and let me know how you think it turned out. If you found this video enjoyable or informative at any point in time, please thumbs up the video or consider subscribing to my channel. If you have the time, please consider watching another one of my videos from the choices on your screen or in the description box below. I will see you guys in my next flip.